Strategy. That's got to be the single most overused, abused, and just misunderstood word in the entire corporate world.
Oh, absolutely. It's right up there with synergy.
And circle back.
Yeah.
But seriously, if you look at your company's strategy right now, or heck, even your own personal strategy, what are you actually looking at? Is it a real plan?
Or is it just a wish list with some fancy fonts?
Exactly.
And that really is the million-dollar question. For most organizations, sadly, it's the wish list. We confuse ambition with strategy. We think saying, I want to win, is the same thing as having a plan to win.
And that is precisely why we are doing a deep dive today into a book that basically takes a sledgehammer to that whole way of thinking. We're talking about Good Strategy, Bad Strategy by Richard Rumelt.
A true giant in the field. He's a professor at UCLA Anderson School of Management, and he's, frankly, the guy who's not afraid to call out the emperor for having no clothes when it comes to business planning.
So our mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to shatter the illusion of those, template-style plans where you just fill in the blanks. And we want to get to the kernel, that's Rumelt's term, of what actually makes a strategy work. And I have to say, I am very excited to explode some buzzwords today.
As am I. But it's more than just exploding buzzwords. This is really a lesson in critical thinking. It's about the art of making hard choices. Because if your strategy doesn't hurt a little, if you aren't saying no to things, you probably don't have one.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Rumelt starts by throwing down the gauntlet. He talks about bad strategy. But he's not just saying bad strategy is a good plan that didn't work out right.
Correct. And that's a key distinction. Bad strategy isn't about bad luck or a few execution errors.
Okay.
It's a specific type of dysfunction. It's a condition. And Rumelt identifies these very specific hallmarks of this condition.
So it's like a pathology. Let's diagnose it. What's the first symptom we should be looking for?
The first one is fluff.
Fluff. I love that. It sounds so harmless, but I'm guessing it's not.
It's really not. Fluff is superficial gibberish. It's when a company uses vague language, complex jargon, all these esoteric concepts to create the illusion of high-level thinking. It's designed purely to mask a lack of substance. If you're reading a strategy doc and it says something like, our strategy is a customer-centric, synergistic paradigm shift.
To leverage world-class intermediation. Yeah, I've seen that slide.
That's fluff.
It sounds smart, though. Or at least it sounds expensive.
It sounds expensive, but it says absolutely nothing. It's using big words to hide the fact that you don't actually know what you're doing. It masks the absence of thought.
Okay, so fluff is just the wrapper. What happens when you actually open the box? What's inside?
Well, often you find the second hallmark, failure to face the challenge. This one is huge. You cannot solve a problem if you don't define it. Rumelt uses the example of International Harvester.
The tractor company.
Yeah. Back in the day, they were struggling. I mean, massively. And their strategy documents were thick, glossy, full of initiatives about tightening up the organization, improving teamwork, boosting morale.
Wait, hang on. Improving teamwork, boosting morale. Those sound like good things. Why does Rumelt call that bad strategy?
Because they were totally irrelevant to the problem. That's the trap. Those are good things, but they weren't the solution.
Right.
The reality was that their labor costs were structurally higher than their competitors, and the whole market for their equipment was collapsing.
So they were rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic.
Exactly. But here's the fascinating part, the psychology of it. Why did they do that? Because focusing on teamwork feels good. It feels productive.
Yeah, you can control that.
You can control a timesheet. You can control a team-building exercise. You cannot control the global price of grain or a labor union contract without immense pain. So they focused on what felt controllable while the business burned down around them.
That is terrifying. It's like productive procrastination on a corporate scale.
Precisely. And that leads us directly to the third characteristic, which I think is probably the most common one we all see.
Which is?
Mistaking goals for strategy.
This is the one that confuses people. Rumelt tells this story about a CEO named Chad Logan, right?
Right. Logan runs a graphic arts company. Rumelt asks him, what's your strategy? And Logan puffs out his chest and says, we have a 2020 strategy. We're going to grow revenue by 20% every year and have a 20% profit margin.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here. Those are great numbers. Who wouldn't want that? Why isn't that a strategy?
Because that's an ambition. It's a desire. It's like saying, my strategy is to win Wimbledon.
Okay.
Great goal, but how? Strategy is the how. It is the specific set of actions you take to overcome the obstacles standing between you and that goal. If you just have the target without the plan, you don't have a strategy. you have a wish.
I feel a little attacked.
Yeah.
I think I've sat in 20 meetings this year where a slide with a big revenue target was presented as the plan.
We all have, and it's so dangerous because it stops the thinking process. Once you put the number on the board, everyone nods and goes, good strategy, and nobody asks, okay, but what leverage do we actually have to make that happen?
So we have fluff, ignoring the real problem, and confusing wishes with plans.
Yeah.
It seems so obvious when you lay it all out like that. So why is this so common? Are we just lazy?
It's not laziness. Rumelt argues it's actually a social and emotional failure. It comes down to what he calls the unwillingness to choose.
The unwillingness to choose.
Think about it. Strategy is about focus. It's about applying your limited resources to one specific area to get a breakthrough. But to do that, you have to say no to other things. You have to say no to other departments, other projects, other good ideas. And that's socially painful.
Yeah, nobody wants to be the bad guy who kills someone's pet project.
Exactly. Look at Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC, back in the 90s. They were a massive tech giant. But when the PC revolution happened, the executives couldn't agree on a direction. One group wanted to build chips, another wanted to build boxes, another wanted services.
So what did they do?
They compromised. They came up with this vague strategy statement that sort of encompassed everything just to keep the peace in the boardroom. They tried to do it all. Rumelt calls this the break-in neck of strategy because they didn't choose, they didn't focus, and the company eventually collapsed and was acquired.
So the strategy was a camel, a horse, designed by committee.
And a dead camel at that. It's that template-style strategy, you fill in the blanks, vision, mission, values. It becomes a form of administration, not analysis. But there is one more trap Rumelt mentions that I think we really need to dig into.
Okay.
The trap of new thought.
New thought. This sounds a little philosophical.
It refers to that early 20th century movement, and you see it in the modern equivalent, like the law of attraction, that believes positive thinking creates reality.
I have to push back a little here. Are we really saying a CEO shouldn't be positive? Isn't optimism part of leadership? You have to inspire the troops.
You're absolutely right. You do have to inspire. But Rumelt makes a critical distinction between motivation and strategy. Optimism is great for motivation,
Okay.
but it is poison for strategy.
Poison, that's a strong word.
It is. But think about it. If you believe that a positive mindset ensures success, you naturally tend to ignore risks. You ignore the possibility of failure. You don't look at the costs.
Right.
Strategy requires you to look at the worst case scenario. It requires you to look at the competitor who wants to destroy you. If you're just manifesting success, you aren't strategizing, you're dreaming. You need a little paranoia to see the obstacles clearly.
That is a serious reality check. Okay, so we've cleared away the fluff. We've stopped manifesting. We are ready to actually do the hard work. What does good strategy actually look like? Rumelt has a framework for this, right?
Yeah.
He does. He calls it the kernel. And what I love about this is how simple it is. It strips away all the corporate noise. The kernel has 3 parts: the diagnosis, the guiding policy, and coherent action.
Okay, let's break these down. Part 1, the diagnosis.
You have to answer the question, what is going on here? A good diagnosis simplifies the massive complexity of reality. It identifies the critical challenge. Rumelt uses Starbucks as an example. Imagine Starbucks is seeing sales drop. One diagnosis could be, we aren't marketing enough. Another could be, our coffee quality has slipped. A third could be, we've lost that third place atmosphere.
And depending on which diagnosis you pick, your strategy is going to be completely different.
Completely different. If you diagnose it as a marketing problem, you buy ads. If you diagnose it as an operational problem, you change your machines. You cannot solve the problem until you diagnose it correctly.
Okay, so once we have the diagnosis, what's step 2? The guiding policy. Now, how is this different from just the plan?
This is a nuance people often miss. Think of the diagnosis as a medical condition. Let's say you have high blood pressure.
Right.
The guiding policy isn't the pill you take. The guiding policy is the overall approach. It's the philosophy. It's the doctor saying, we are going to treat this through lifestyle change rather than just medication.
I see. So the guiding policy sets the guardrails for your actions.
Exactly. Take IBM in the early 90s. Lou Gerstner comes in. The company's falling apart. The diagnosis was that the industry was fragmenting and IBM was becoming irrelevant because it was trying to sell individual pieces of hardware against cheaper competitors.
What was Gerstner's policy?
His guiding policy was to flip that logic on its head. He decided to stop selling pieces and start selling integrated customer solutions. He realized IBM's size, which had been a weakness in the hardware wars, could be a strength if they sold integration that no startup could possibly match. That was the policy. We sell solutions, not parts.
That makes so much sense. It's the big idea that solves the diagnosis, which leads to the third part. Coherent action.
Action. But not just any action. Coherent action. This is where most companies fall apart. They have a diagnosis, maybe a policy, but then their actions are all over the place. One department is cutting costs while another is trying to launch a premium product. They just cancel each other out.
And Rumelt mentions Ford here, doesn't he?
Yes. There was a time at Ford where they had a strategy to be a high-quality manufacturer. That was the guiding policy. But their factory managers were incentivized purely on volume.
Oh.
So the actions pushing out cars as fast as possible completely contradicted the policy of quality. Good strategy coordinates action so that every single step reinforces the others.
So diagnosis, guiding policy, coherent action. That's the kernel.
That's it. If you have those three, you have a strategy. If you don't, you probably just have a list of goals.
I want to talk about what this looks like in the wild, because Rumelt makes this point that good strategy often feels like a surprise. It feels counterintuitive.
It is. Because most people expect strategy to be, we will try harder or we will grow. When a leader actually applies focus, it shocks people. The classic example is Apple in 1997.
The return of Steve Jobs. Now, we all know Apple won in the end, but take us back to that moment.
You have to remember, in 1997, Apple was weeks away from bankruptcy. Michael Dell, the founder of Dell Computers, publicly said that if he were running Apple, he'd shut it down and give the money back to the shareholders.
Wow.
That's how dead they were.
So Jobs walks back in. The world is waiting for a miracle.
What?
They're expecting him to announce some grand vision, some massive growth target.
Maybe a dozen new products to save the company, and he did the exact opposite.
Right.
He took a machete to the company. He cut the product line from dozens of confusing models down to just 4. 1 desktop and 1 laptop for pros, 1 desktop and 1 laptop for consumers. That's it.
He killed the Newton.
Killed the Newton. Cut printers, cut peripherals, fired people.
It sounds like he was shrinking the company, not saving it.
He was focusing it. His diagnosis was that Apple was bleeding to death from complexity. His guiding policy was to simplify everything to survival levels. And his coherent action was that brutal culling of products. It wasn't about growth goals.
Right.
It was about stopping the bleeding. He was just waiting for the next big wave, which turned out to be the iPod and iTunes.
Right.
But he had to survive long enough to get there.
That is such a great example of coherent action, meaning stop doing things.
Absolutely. Strategy is as much about what you don't do as what you do. Another great example of this kind of focus is Desert Storm, General Norman Schwarzkopf.
Gulf War.
Everyone, the media, the pundits, the Iraqi military, they all expected a frontal assault, a direct hit. It's the conventional wisdom.
But Schwarzkopf had the left hook.
The left hook.
Yeah.
He secretly moved this massive force way out to the west into the deep desert where no one thought they could operate, and then flanked the entire Iraqi army. But here's the strategic insight that relates to business. To make that work, he had to suppress competing interests within his own military.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the Air Force wanted to fly their own independent bombing campaigns. The Marines wanted to do an amphibious landing. Everyone wants to be the hero, right?
Sure.
But Schwarzkopf had to say no. He had to force them all to support this single focused plan.
Yeah.
He overcame that unwillingness to choose that we talked about earlier.
It really highlights that strategy is about applying strength against weakness.
Yeah. Yeah.
It brings to mind the ultimate underdog story, which Rumelt talks about, David and Goliath.
Ah, yes. I love Rumelt's take on this. Usually we tell that story as a miracle. The little guy beats the giant against all odds. It's a story about courage.
Right. The brave shepherd boy against the warrior.
But Rumelt says, look closer. It's not a story about courage. It's a story about strategy. It's about a mismatch. Goliath is heavy infantry. He's got armor, a sword, a shield. He is designed for close quarters combat, and he assumes David will fight him on those terms.
But David refuses to play that game.
David is a slinger. In ancient warfare, slingers were like artillery. They had range and speed. David realized that if he fought Goliath with a sword, he'd die. That's a bad diagnosis. But if he saw the challenge as, how do I use speed against weight, the strategy completely changes. He targeted the only exposed weakness, the forehead from a distance.
It wasn't an underdog miracle. It was a tactical assassination.
It was finding leverage. It was refusing to accept the opponent's definition of the battle. And we see this in business, too. Look at Walmart versus Kmart.
Okay, Walmart, everyone just says their strategy was low prices.
That's the outcome, not the strategy. The strategy was how they achieved it when Kmart, the giant, couldn't. Kmart had stores everywhere, but they were stuck in inertia. They let each store manager pick their own inventory. It was loose, inefficient.
And Sam Walton did something different.
Sam Walton viewed the network of stores as the unit, not the individual store. He put big stores in small towns, which broke conventional wisdom, but then he linked them with a logistics and data network that was light years ahead of everyone else. He could track every single tube of toothpaste.
So while Kmart was paralyzed by their old ways, letting managers do whatever, Walmart was operating as one coherent machine.
Exactly. Walton found a hidden strength, logistics, and network density that Kmart simply couldn't replicate because their internal politics and old habits wouldn't allow it. That is leverage.
It reminds me of the Cold War example Rumelt gives with Andy Marshall. It's a bit technical. I think he calls it the cost-imposing strategy.
It sounds technical, but it's actually really simple. Think of it like a poker game. Imagine you're playing against someone who has very little cash left and you have a huge stack of chips.
Okay.
You keep betting high, not because you have great cards, but because you know they can't afford to call the bet.
You're using your bank account as a weapon.
Precisely. For years, the U.S. just reacted to the Soviets. They build a tank, we build a tank. Andy Marshall said, let's look at the asymmetries. The U.S. was rich and technologically advanced. The Soviet Union was poor and struggling to keep up.
So instead of matching them tank for tank, we shifted the game.
We invested in technologies like strict accuracy, stealth, high-tech R&D that were expensive for us but ruinously expensive for them to try and counter. We forced them to compete in areas where we were strong and they were weak. We imposed costs on them that eventually helped bankrupt their system.
It's the same principle as David and Goliath. Don't fight their fight, make them fight yours.
Exactly right.
So let's bring this all home. We've talked about generals and CEOs and massive corporations, but what if I'm just trying to get a project done or lead a small team? How do I use the kernel on a Tuesday morning?
The kernel applies to everything. Diagnosis, guiding policy, coherent action. Here's a concrete exercise for you. Start with a blank sheet of paper.
Okay, blank sheet.
Stop worrying about your vision statement or your goals. Ask yourself, what is the single biggest obstacle holding me back right now? Just one. Is it a lack of time? Is it a skill gap? Is it a competitor? Write that down. That's your diagnosis.
And
Then, forget the wish list. Write down the single guiding policy, the one approach that gives you leverage against that specific obstacle. And finally, list 3 concrete actions that support that policy. If an action doesn't support the policy, cross it out.
that sounds terrifyingly simple, but also really hard because it means ignoring the 10 other things screaming for your attention.
That is the price of strategy. If you're juggling 10 different priorities, like that tech startup Rumelt mentions that tried to launch 10 products at once, you are failing. You are mistaking activity for progress. What would happen if you focused on just one? The one that, if solved, makes everything else easier.
Before we wrap up, I want to throw a little wrench in the works here. We've been praising Rumelt's clarity, the kernel, the focus, but the world is messy.
This is the provocative thought I'd want to leave everyone with. Rumelt's framework is brilliant. It's clean. Diagnosis, policy, action. But there are other thinkers out there, like Henry Mintzberg, who argue that the world is sometimes too chaotic for a clear diagnosis up front.
Right. If you're in a brand new industry that's changing every week, can you really have a kernel locked in from day one?
Exactly. Sometimes strict adherence to a single diagnosis can blind you to luck or to sudden changes in the market. Mintzberg talks about emergent strategy, the idea that strategy sometimes comes from doing things and then seeing what works, rather than planning it all out in advance.
So Rumelt gives us a structure, but maybe we need to be careful not to become too rigid with it.
Precisely. Use the kernel to focus, but don't let your diagnosis become a dogma. The world changes, and your diagnosis might need to change with it.
That is a lot to chew on. So for everyone listening, take a look at your to-do list. Is it a strategy or is it a wish list? Are you playing to your strengths or are you fighting Goliath with a sword? Go find your kernel.
And don't be afraid to cut the fluff.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you next time.